Hello, welcome everyone to another live Thursday question and answer show with Promethean Action. My name's Adam Sturman. I'm joined today with Barbara Boyd and Susan Kokinda of Promethean Action and Promethean Pack. Welcome everyone. It is May 28th, and the name of today's show, we're going to juke you a little bit here. The name of today's show is Regime Change. Warsh takes the Fed. Trump invites Iran to the Accords. Now, we are going to be talking about the absolute earthquake that's going on in the Fed right now because it's a really big deal. And I know I can talk about the elections because everyone's been following. So Trump went what, 181 out of 181 of elections for the primaries that he called. Let me just pull it up here. Yeah. So Trump won every single primary race that he endorsed. I think everyone saw this already. And then he made he made a really funny comment about Talrico looking like Alfred E. Newman, which I thought was absolutely hilarious. But that aside, I think Barbara picked up on something which continues this discussion about what's next in Iran, because that is the story that is not on Trump's Truth Social. That hasn't been discussed on his Truth Social now for a little bit. But there is a story that's developing. So I'd like to hand it over to Barbara.
Yeah, I mean, I basically, Adam, can you pull up the New York Times from this morning? You know, what it actually is all fixated on and everybody's jumping up and down about is that in the cabinet meeting yesterday, Trump was asked about this deal that the Iran is doing or appears to be doing with Oman to control the Strait of Hormuz. And what Trump said is they'll behave or else we'll have to bomb them too. Now, I can assure you that in the city of London, that was an earthquake, because what most people don't realize about what's going on right now in Iran is the actual strategic picture. Is it really just Israel and the Arabs going at it as they've been doing for hundreds of years? Or is it something else? Is it the last stand of the city of London, which is my contention? The city of London, the British Empire, the modern British Empire, depends on control of this area to actually survive. Trump is kicking them out. And that's the real story here. I am going to be developing, probably for my next video, the real story of what Tony Blair has done to actually create this war, just like he was the public face, really, of the war in Iraq. That gets a little dense, but you've got to realize that every single Gulf country in this area has been controlled through the city of London for decades. And that's very, very clear. Oman is really, really, really close to a gentleman by the name of Tony Blair. And, basically working out some kind of deal to control the strait is right up the alley of the city of London. Trump saying if they do that, we're going to have to bomb them too, is indicative of really what the whole dynamic is here. It's not about religion. Yes, religion is a big part of it, but mostly it's about resources. Do you realize that Iran has the largest lithium deposit in the entire world? Do you realize that what the British are trying to do here is get in on the deal using networks which they've built up for centuries? So the big picture, the real story is Iran. Basically what Trump said is, I want everybody in the Abraham Accords. I want everybody to join my policy for the Middle East. By bringing up the Abraham Accords and insisting that the Gulf countries come over at this point and actually join it, it's not what people would actually think. That puts massive pressure on Israel. Why? Because Saudi Arabia has made it very clear that it isn't joining the Abraham Accords until there's some kind of genuine development for a Palestinian state. until there's some kind of genuine, actual resolution of this conflict, which has gone on for years. And what Trump is saying is the United States is going to actually control this area of the world, and not through the way that it's been done before, but by these nations themselves actually becoming sovereign for the first time in their history. And that's what the Abraham Accords actually is all about. So that's the hidden story, which very few people are actually picking up on. But when you do the research, when you actually go back and look at the Tony Blair Institute, and then you look up Iran, and all of a sudden you're going to see that as of 2019, he was planning all of this. His entire emphasis was on profiling the IRGC, so that we can have them act the way we want to do it. What are the two goals for the Tony Blair Institute in the world? Declared goals: stopping populism, i.e. stopping Donald Trump in the United States. And second, actually working on this question of using Iran as a cat's paw to bring the city of London fully back into the Middle East. So that's the real hidden story here. And we're going to be developing it at Promethean Action and really, really, really filling out the picture. Trump has Blair, in his board of peace because he's keeping him close. Keep my enemies close. That's the way I can figure out what they're doing. But that's the story. And it's massive, and it's very, very important for us, for the United States of America. Because as Trump keeps saying, if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, that blows up the entire world. And that's been the actual battle he's been waging, together with actually taking over the Middle East and taking it away from the city of London. And that in turn is going to blow up the city of London's entire capacity in the world. So I know that's a picture which very few people really, are looking at. But if you understand the war in Iraq and where it came from, and you understand this one, I just had a hunch, and I went looking, and that's what I found. So that's really, I think, a major story here, which we'll be developing.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on YouTube. As you're joining us this morning, please just drop us a like on YouTube. If you're joining us on x.com, thank you. Please give us a share. Susan?
Okay. Well, I want to pick up on another side of that. So if you could play that clip on energy dominance.
Yes. Okay, let me know if the audio shows up here, guys. Let me see. It should.
No.
Okay. Yeah, let me re-add that.
Yeah, while he's getting that pulled up. Look, the reason that the president has been able to do this is because he's exercising what I call real hard power, which is our physical economic ability to take care of ourselves. And this is a clip from the cabinet meeting yesterday with Secretary Burgum, which I think hits the nail on the head.
With this energy dominance, us, as you just noted, largest oil producer in the world, largest natural gas producer in the world, largest natural gas exporter. This is an opportunity for us to bring prosperity and affordability here at home, but also bring peace abroad. So President Trump, your energy dominance strategy with Chris Wright, Lee Zeldin, all the people that are working on this, people around the room, it's been really incredible. And of course, you mentioned Venezuela, but all that flowing to our Gulf Coast refineries is also helping to keep the price of gas down at home. So again, it's an amazing transformation. Bottom line is the center of geopolitics around energy has moved from other parts of the world to the Western Hemisphere.
Okay, that's it right there. The center of the geopolitics of energy has moved from the rest of the world to the Western Hemisphere. What Barbara was just describing in terms of British control over the Middle East and how they've orchestrated 100 years plus of conflict so that they can keep control of the energy flows coming out of the Middle East. It's being broken on two fronts right now. Number one is the way the president is moving in the Mideast to throw this British-controlled operation around Iran and the Strait of Hormuz out. But that could only be done because we have created energy dominance here in the United States. Honestly, I don't think the president would have launched Operation Epic Fury if he hadn't already had the successful, 6-hour incursion into Venezuela that pulled, the shortest, it wasn't a war, like the shortest incursion in history, pulling Maduro out, which has turned Venezuela, into a country which is now beginning to prosper again. Whereas Secretary of State Rubio said, I believe in the cabinet meeting that we just looked at, if not, it was in a press conference, where he said the money is now going to the Venezuelan people so that they can actually develop. But again, because we've got the oil flows from Venezuela, we've unleashed our own energy dominance. This choke point in the world, which the British have used literally for 100 years plus, is being dismantled so that you have a United States which can reshape the world not around an American-based great game, but which can reshape the world around what President Trump has said all along. I want a world of sovereign nations working with each other for their shared development, not for the benefit of the financial parasite that's been sitting in the City of London. So I thought Burgum's comment was very much to the point and very coherent with everything that this administration is doing right now.
Thank you very much, Susan, and thank you everyone for tuning in today. So I'd like to just start with some super chats that came in from our supporters here. And let me take the first one here from David Gray. Thanks for joining us this week, David. We love having you here. Also, I did get your messages on X. That's pretty funny. You got your account back. Okay. He says, please pick one for me. Antifa terrorism, uranium arrests, Rubio's huge impact on NATO, India, Lavrov, CBDC halted, American homes for people, Blair tells Britain to copy Trump, Abraham Accords, a once-in-a-lifetime moment. Barbara and Susan, to get started here.
I want to talk about the Abraham Accords because people have been stuck on this, Psy-war op, which essentially says, Trump is controlled by Netanyahu, blah, 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 blah. And, Lindsey Graham is controlled by Netanyahu, but Trump isn't controlled by Netanyahu. And Netanyahu doesn't even control Lindsey Graham, really. It's just a whole bunch of, if you look at the lobbies and you actually understand them, people say, oh, AIPAC is this monstrous lobby, it's huge, etc. Just compare the defense industry's lobby with AIPAC. It's piddling. The people who actually like forever wars are funding the United States Senate, and that's where we have a real problem, okay? But AIPAC is just a minor player in that entire framework of billions of dollars floating around. So, my pick here is the Abraham Accords. This was the beginning of the Trump administration. His very first visit was to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia had been an asset deployed by the intelligence community, the deep state, for centuries to wage our forever wars. Trump went there in the first term and said, we ain't doing terrorism anymore, folks. What we're going to do is development of this entire area. And he sent Jared Kushner and others on listening tours to hear from the Gulf monarchies what they actually thought. And what they said was, look, we're stuck in this framework of forever wars. We're stuck in this framework of Palestine versus Israel. And somehow we have to find an escape hatch. And basically what was said was, let's actually do the following. You guys come in, you recognize that Israel has a right to exist. In turn, we have to develop the entire area, including Gaza. All right. And that was the beginning structure of the Abraham Accords. And in his first term, he established enormous momentum. He got primarily the UAE in a big way to join. The next target was Saudi Arabia. Now, Biden did nothing with this. He sat on it. He let the regular dynamic of this area actually flow and function, because I'm not going to do anything which Donald Trump did. We're going to reject everything that Donald Trump did. That was the Biden administration. There was a little bit of effort towards the end, and essentially it looked very much like Saudi Arabia was coming around to actually joining on the terms set by Donald Trump. Then you had October 7th. If you think that was accidental, you're wrong. It was all designed to wreck that entire momentum towards actually getting a solution in the Middle East and setting the clock back and starting this religious warfare all over again. All right, so then Trump comes back in. And now what he's saying is, I'm not going to, I just spent a lot of time, money, and political capital on getting a settlement here. I'm not going to leave this area by just decking Iran. I'm going to leave it with a peace settlement that actually works for everybody. That's why he said yesterday, I don't think we can settle this thing unless we actually get all of the Gulf states to join the Abraham Accords. Now, what does that do for Israel? It's clear as a bell. I said it before. They're not going to join the Abraham Accords unless there's an actually effective solution, or at least a beginning solution of what happens to Gaza and Palestine. So the media is focused on the wrong story here, because they're not looking at who has actually controlled this area. What's the economics of this entire battle? And the economics aren't just about oil. They've been about oil. And then Trump took that weapon away. We're now, as Susan just pointed out, the dominant oil and gas producer in the world. We're self-sufficient at this point. We don't need it, as Trump keeps saying. But there's something else going on, which is you can't get out of a completely globalized and controlled world. And we were very close to destruction under Biden, without actually solving certain problems in terms of your supply chains, in terms of everything else that's going on. And you see what Trump is doing. Every single peace settlement is also a resource settlement for new supply chains, particularly in the rare metals, which actually fuel the 21st century economy. So, I think the Abraham Accords is the one I'd pick, because it is a once in a lifetime moment. And it would really solve this problem of peace through development, which, if you look at Iran right now, they're running out of water. That's the key thing to realize. They're running out of water. The desalinization would solve all of that for the entire area, but Scott Bessent is pushing on all of those actual physical economic weak points. And that's where the whole thing is going to collapse ultimately, I believe, is on the fact that their economy can't sustain itself under the massive kind of economic pressure we put on them.
Thank you. Susan, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll stick on this one, because I think it really is absolutely critical for people to think through strategically how this has actually unfolded. I mean, one of my friends, Alex Craner, keeps using this example of, you put red ants and black ants in a jar, and then you shake the jar up so that they will fight each other. Well, that is the perfect description of the way the British have organized this entire region of the world for over 100 years. The red ants, let's just say, are Israel. The black ants are everybody else. So what do the British do? They plunk down the state of Israel in the middle of this area, and then they keep shaking the jar. And that's what they have been doing for the past 70, 80 years in this region. But part of it is, okay, the red ants are sitting there surrounded by black ants who are telling them, we don't believe in your right to exist. Well, you're going to end up with a kind of garrison state mentality in there, which is what Netanyahu and his team have fed off of. the British controlled, I'll call it right wing in Israel, has always preferred the Islamic fundamentalists. It's why the Netanyahu government, through back channels, was financing Hamas prior to October 7th, because they do not want secular authorities. Just like the British didn't want secular governments to emerge in the Mideast region throughout the 20th century. Whenever you had a secular government, it came under attack by the Muslim Brotherhood, by the British-run Muslim Brotherhood. Add something else to it. Not just secular governments. How about governments that actually want economic development? And again, go back to Iran as the classic example. Mossadegh, the nationalist in the 1950s, wanted economic development. Gets overthrown by the British and their little friends in the CIA, the Dulles brothers. The Shah comes in, but at a certain point, the Shah is starting to function in the interests of the Iranian people, wants nuclear development, wants nuclear power. Guess what nuclear power does if you're trying to control the world through the control of fossil fuels? You don't want nuclear development because that breaks their control. And that's where, you know, our energy dominance will be going next. Right now, yes, it's based on oil, natural gas, but the future lies with nuclear power. The minute the Shah started to move toward that kind of economic development, he's out, and what comes in his place? Again, one of these Islamic fundamentalist operations, because those are the real black ants in this. And so for 50 years, you know, whenever it looks like something is going to develop outside of British imperial control, they shake the jar. Now, what Trump is doing, number one, is and number two, creating a world in which the black ants and the red ants are both told, you're going to have to live peacefully with each other. You know, and that, you know, that is the overall strategic at this point. And people really do need to think through historically and strategically, not react from these simple-minded, you know, definitions of what the fight is, whether it's pro-Israel, pro-Palestine. It is much, much more complicated from the standpoint of it. Well, in a sense, it's not complicated at all. That's not the issue. The issue is the British Empire versus sovereign nations and the way they have played all these forces in the Mideast for over 100 years. And we're on the verge of ending that, which is very, very big.
Thank you, Susan. And thank you, David, for the question. The next one here is also on asking about one of our friends here. And this narrative I have seen in my limited news consumption. I have seen this angle come up here, but maybe we could talk about it for just a second. Tom Luongo says, first off, thank you, Chad, for joining us every week. Tom Luongo says that Iran nuke dust can track back to Obama. Therefore, we can also track NK's nukes, North Korea's nukes to Bill Clinton. Clearly, there is also evidence against the neocons for 9/11 now. Is Trump going to nail all three? Or is that just a complete another one of these psyop storylines that are out there?
No, I don't. I think Tom is right. In other words, the point is that the Iran nuke. We proved through this war that Iran has been lying through their teeth about what they're doing to everybody. Okay, and you know they had missiles which could reach Europe. That wasn't supposed to happen. They had 60%. Enriched uranium. They said they didn't, and you know they issued a fatwa against precisely that. So they've been lying through their teeth, and the lying started, as Trump keeps emphasizing, through the Iran nuclear deal, which Obama did. Now, Trump said something very mysterious yesterday, which I sort of jumped out of my seat about, because he said, you know, Obama picked the wrong country to do that. Okay, he could have picked a different country, but I'm not going to tell you which one. What is doing that? What is he talking about? And I think that's part and parcel of what Tom is actually picking up on here, because is it, you know, some kind of deliberate placement of WMDs that we're talking about? After all, we found out through Tulsi and others and Victoria Nuland's confession that we had all these biolabs in Ukraine doing what? These are the big questions, because, you know, when you're dealing in fundamentals here, you have to recognize that the British Empire has always been about population control, depopulation. At the center of the whole thing is Malthusianism. We need less people in the world so that we can actually, control the world, because too many people ends up being difficult in, overall control. So tracing the nuclear dust back to Obama is absolutely correct. Bill Clinton, I don't know about in terms of North Korea, because I haven't looked at that. It seems that what Tom is saying is any form of appeasement here actually results in these countries developing nuclear weapons. But in the overall scope of the world, if you're, one of these countries that is sort of in the middle somewhere, not a great power, one of the things you actually have to think about is whether your survival depends on being able to threaten the rest of the world with a nuclear weapon. That's why President Trump's Golden Dome development is so incredibly important. You want to stop nuclear proliferation in that form? Well, you basically have to give the advantage to the defense. You have to learn how to shoot down incoming missiles and drones using advanced technologies to do it. That's what he's doing. He's changing that entire strategic map. So the neocons in 9/11, yeah, we've always said it was an inside job. It's kind of impossible to contemplate that it was anything but that. Do I think Trump is going to nail all three? I think he's going to start with Obama, and he's going to start with the enormous damage Obama and Biden did to this country. Whether he goes all the way back to Bill Clinton and North Korea and all these other things, I just don't know. But I think wiping out this Obama apparatus and detailing for people exactly what the fight was here will result in the survival of our country. And that's really the question here.
Thank you very much, Barbara. And thank you, Chad. Thank you, Chad, for joining us every week. Okay, I'm going to take a few thanks here, and then I'm going to jump into a rather edgy question. I think we should just say that we're not part of this thing. You'll see how I'll put it together here. So first, I'd like to say thank you to Mother of Pearl, best podcast on the interweb. So thankful for this group of warriors. Thank you so much for joining us. Please make sure you subscribe to our free newsletter. So we have a free daily and a weekly newsletter. If you're interested, the link is in the description. You can subscribe totally free. You'll get most of our content. Thank you, Mother of Pearl. Also like to say thank you to Tara. I told you you can either, the links to give a one-time donation are in the description of this YouTube video. And if you want to support us on a monthly basis, you can just become a paying subscriber to our free newsletter. So hope that answers your question. Okay, also I have this friend here from Down Under. There's a little scale under Super Chat. Thank you for your work. And thank you so much for joining us, Friends Down Under. Friend Down Under. Okay, so here's the edgy question. And I'm going to jump into two questions from our email newsletter. So Joy says, the Balfour Declaration should be revoked, or if the Rothschilds' assets are seized, then America could control Palestine until it is given back to the people, not genocidal Jewish supremacists. Okay, so the first questions I have on today's slides, coincidentally, was on this exact question. Now, Barbara and Susan, do you want to address anything on the Super Chat question on this Balfour Declaration or the Jewish supremacists? Because this is literally the first question I had on my slides today. Barbara has used the phrase Zionist. Can you please elaborate on our definition of Zionist and the right of Israel to exist? Thank you.
Well, I don't think there's any question that given the Holocaust, basically people tried to come up with a way to give the Jewish people a state where they could be protected against the types of anti-Semitic purges which occurred throughout European history. So there's no question, in my view, that Israel should exist and that it has a very, very decent tradition. But as Susan referenced, when you're constantly under attack in this religious warfare dynamic set up by the British, you end up kind of with a Spartan idea of your existence. I am quite certain that in Israel, the primary goal of the government is to protect the Jewish people. That's the primary goal of any sovereign state. Have they done it in a way that I would do it here? I'm not there. I'm not getting missiles in my face every day. I'm not having to look, although it's increasingly getting that way here, at somebody walking down the street and trying to figure out whether they're going to pull out a bomb and detonate themselves in front of me and my kids. All right, that's a daily reality, which people have to get sort of real about. Zionism is something that came into existence way back when, during the British Empire's goal of creating various ideologies off of the physical circumstances of various peoples. And there are very, very good Zionists in the world who actually are universal philosophers of religion. And there's this tendency called revisionist Zionism, the Zionism of a guy by the name of Jabotinsky, who was a British intelligence agent and whose various philosophies, actually are this kind of militant Spartan idea of the Jewish state versus the other ideas of the Jewish state, which have flourished throughout history. The whole problem in this analysis is one of economic development. After the agreements worked out during the Clinton administration, the very promising agreements between Israel and the PLO, the whole thing was dismantled quickly. And the reason why, in our view, was they didn't put shovels in the ground fast enough. They turned to the World Bank and the IMF to actually do the development program, which was called for by those accords. So it became a disaster yet again, because the issue is, how are you going to solve the water problem in the Middle East? How are you going to build the infrastructure for these places that have been bombed into smithereens? How are you going to keep the old colonialist powers completely out of the area who have ruined everything, including the French in Lebanon? Okay, these are the issues you've got to deal with, and you got to figure out how do you get development going jointly in such a way that you can end the cycle of forever wars. So that's my view on the thing. I don't claim to be an expert. And yes, my dog is having a slight fit because there's dogs actually crossing the way here, which he does. He's a corgi. But that's my view of it.
Well,
Thank you.
I'll add, look, I think there's an underlying methodological problem that keeps coming up with all of these questions. Because the minute you start taking a race or a religion and you universally condemn it, the British have you, because the fight in the world is between two images of man. And within all of these religions, including Christianity, people who label themselves Christians, you will find two different images of man. So I don't worry so much about the labels. I'm looking at how are people functioning from the standpoint of this dividing line, that all men are equal because we are created in the image of the Creator. That's my viewpoint. That's the viewpoint of our founding fathers. That's the viewpoint of great monotheistic religions. There is a Creator. There are universal principles. We're created in His image. And by virtue of that, we can discover how he created this universe and we can act on it. And the other image of man is the imperial image of man, which goes back thousands of years. And that is, we're just little animals, we're creatures of passion, we can be manipulated on the basis of our senses and our perceptions, but we never use our creative powers to act on the universe for the benefit of all mankind. And I'm telling you, you take all the big three monotheistic, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, you got both in both. So don't start just taking the labels and saying this, all roads lead back to the Jews. All Muslims want to kill everybody who's not Islamic. This is an enemy way of thinking that people have fallen for. And we're never going to be able to solve the problems, whether they're in the Mideast or in the world, if people don't start operating from the standpoint of that much more fundamental understanding. And from that understanding, go look at what somebody is doing in Israel and judge them. What side are they actually on? That fight. Or in, Saudi Arabia or Lebanon. What side are they actually on in that fight? And are they consciously on the other side? Or are they just trapped on the other side? Which is one of the things Donald Trump is trying to do, is create a conception of a world and begin to launch policies where people who have been trapped in a terrible image of man by virtue of, in a certain sense, the Stockholm syndrome, I've often said, and show them, no, there's another world out there where you actually can be a human being. So, there is just so much on social media, which is just this simple-minded labeling of people, which then gets really emotional reactions. I see how emotional people get. It's the Jews, it's the Muslims, and behind the curtain, you've got an imperial system which wants to wipe you out, whether you're Jewish or Muslim, or Christian, if you happen to get in their way. That's who you should be looking at.
Thank you, Susan. And I want to comment on what you just finished on. It's literally stereotyping as propaganda. And I'm sure there's a more technical word for it, but you use the techniques of how humans stereotype things, and you attack that. You use that technique to attack other people on the planet in various ways. Thank you. So thank you, Susan. Thank you, Barbara. And I'm going to continue here and jump back to some questions. So another friend from Australia. Pray for wisdom and listen, folks. Thank you for joining us, friend from down under. And we're going to go back to asking some more questions now about the Iranian regime. So thank you. I think it's Cyrex Core, something. So thank you very much for the question. And I'm going to pull this in with almost identical questions we got from our email newsletter. There can be no deal with the current Iranian regime. They lie, have lied, and continue to do so. You cannot negotiate with terrorists. I wonder why the Iranian people have not taken over now that the military is gone. Well, I'm not exactly certain the military is gone, but let me pull up these two other questions here on Iran and what's going on. Okay, let me turn this off here. So Trump's offer to join Iran, Trump's offer to Iran to join the Abraham Accords appears like food for the rags, as Iran has no intention of agreeing that Israel should exist. Iran responded by laying mines down in the Strait of Hormuz, and their Houthis are all on their way to close the Suez Canal. Their buddies, Pakistan, reject the accords as well. The Iranians continue to spit in the face of the US, but Trump needs to give the appearance that peace is near. There's a lot more going on than what is being discussed, and we know the people, no matter how much are counting on Trump, we know he is talking BS, not a good feeling. So I just want to pull up this person's name. Thank you, Laurie, for your question and comment. And Jetski says, I am confused at President Trump's strategy to invite Iran to the Abraham Accords accord to the IRGC. Thank you, Jetski, for your comment.
Well, I think basically all of these questions avoid the reality that isn't just talked about and what Trump is doing. You have a split, quite obviously, within the Iranian regime at this point. You have Russia and China actually working, in my belief, on back channels to actually help solve this problem. And Trump is actually looking at it from the standpoint not of any one of these kind of, I'll call them set pieces on the chessboard, okay? And they're set pieces. So what is the IRGC? The IRGC is the most rabid cult-like formation in the current Iranian situation. But by being financed by all of these British banks over the years, they control the infrastructure of the country. They run the infrastructure of the country. So targeting the IRGC, which Trump is doing, is critical to actually being able to free the Iranian people who live, in constant fear. I mean, look, they already killed 30,000 people for going into the streets. They're killing people right and left right now for protesting. That's the nature of the regime. Trump has got two choices at this point. He's either going to do an ultimate military strike, which may happen, or the economic pressure will cause them to come to their senses because the population simply will rise up in an organized fashion because of the fact that they have to live, they have to have food, they have to have gas, they have to have all of these other things. So, basically, I think that and the Abraham Accords, what is that? It's not a fantasy. It happened already, as Trump said yesterday. We have various Middle East networks and nations who were the sworn enemies of Israel. When I started this, I said Trump started out by going into Saudi Arabia, which had been being used as a pawn by the Bushes and everybody else to wage endless wars in the Middle East, and said the United States is not doing terrorism anymore. He then proceeded in his first term to wipe out ISIS very, very quickly and surgically, all right, which was, the other equivalent of the IRGC, born out of the stupid Iranian war. He's not in this for the long-term kinetic warfare. He's either going to wipe them out economically, and his kinetic strikes will be based on wiping them out economically, or we're going to have a peace agreement. It's one of the two. He's already created a factional situation very clearly in the government between those who are opposing the IRGC. There's a huge battle going on internal to Iran, which people who say there can't be any deal, they're liars, etc., don't even recognize. So, the reason why the people aren't rising up is because that battle has not resolved itself. And the tensions, the pressure Trump is putting on the situation is all directed towards getting sane people to actually resolve it. He's also rejected the idea of simply imposing the Shah's son on the country, which is what Israel wants. It's very unclear that would even be successful. And, he's basically said this has to happen organically like it did in Venezuela. Somebody's got to take leadership here in terms of the country and send it in our direction. So that's the tension, and I'm sure everybody feels it, but you've got to recognize that this is war. You can't sit in the background and understand everything that's going on. I don't even pretend to. There are dozens and dozens of back channels here working on this situation, I believe primarily from Russia and China in big ways. And everybody wants the situation to be stabilized. So I think people who keep getting caught up in the torrent of the moment and the propaganda from the press and saying, most of all, that Trump is talking BS when he raises the Abraham Accords, of course people are going to say that, you know, they don't want to recognize Israel. That's the whole issue. All right. It's been the issue for years. And, you know, you don't get anywhere by saying, okay, that's their position. You fight that position, which is what Trump is actually saying. Look at the future, people. What's the big deal? You recognize Israel, you get Israeli technology, which is a big deal. You get desalination plants to solve your water problem, you know, and that actually helps you develop. You're in a different world than the one that has been set up by the City of London for hundreds of years. That's the goal. Is it bold? Is it, you know, basically completely outside the box in terms of what anybody has thought of before? You bet. But that's what you actually elected Donald Trump to do, is get outside the box of all of these stupid linear conceptions of how we actually do things in the world. So that's, you know, that's what I'd have to say to all of those questions. You know, people change in the course of war. You know, things really get quite different once you're facing the problem, which the Iranian leadership in whatever form is facing now, is how do we feed our people? How are we going to feed our people in this situation? How are we going to, will they rise up? I think so, if you don't solve the problem. So, you know, basically the group that has broken itself off and that we are negotiating with has said and recognized we have real problems, folks. People have to be fed. We have to have living standards in this country, and the pressure which the United States through Scott Besson and others is exerting here will destroy us unless we actually agree to a solution which is to our benefit. And that's the carrot that Trump keeps holding out, is look at the future. This could be entirely different. Will it succeed? I don't know. It depends on mostly whether our people here get smart and actually understand what the president is doing.
Thank you, Barbara. Susan, any comment on this one? Or this, because we also had some ones from the
Yeah, let's keep going.
Okay. I'd like to give a quick shout out. A very generous super chat came in. Thank you, checking it out, for your very generous super chat. I wish I wish you would have sent us a question. If you have a question, drop it in the chat and I'll try and catch it here and ask it. But thank you very much for joining us today. Please make sure you're subscribed to the channel here. We do 4 pre-recorded political updates a week. 3 political updates a week, plus this live Q&A show every Thursday. So make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel and consider getting our free email newsletter. The link's in the description. All right, I'm going to take another question here from Amy, just to stay on this issue of what's going on with the Middle East and the peace process here. So Amy, thank you very much for joining us this week and being one of our first real fans here on the YouTube live show. Why doesn't Trump want the prince to lead with the freedom? Why doesn't Trump want the prince to lead with the freedom group that want democracy? Why does Israel want him?
Because Israel is stuck in the trap of essentially thinking about the entire thing as a regime change war. And Trump has rejected that. He said in reality, it's happened. All right, there has been regime change, but we didn't set out to do regime change. And, you know, if you look at the prince's backing and everything else, he will be seen by the Iranian people as a return to the Shah and a pawn of Israel, because that's where his financing and other stuff has actually come from. He's probably a good guy. I don't deny that. All right. But you can't get around the history here. And Trump's entire idea, just look at Venezuela. All right. His entire idea is you don't impose someone from the outside who's been living outside the country for years and expect them to come in and have popular resonance with the population. You need the leadership to rise from within that Iranian population at this point. And I think the people who are negotiating, the faction fight I just mentioned, has within it the future leaders of Iran. So that's how I'd answer the question.
Yeah, I mean, I just add one thing to further the example that Barbara gave, which is I would not be at all surprised that the forces pushing Reza Pahlavi, and again, aside from himself as a person and perhaps capable, I don't know, but the forces pushing him are probably the same forces that were pushing the Nobel laureate, I can't even remember her name now, in Venezuela. You know, why don't we make her the president of Venezuela? And Trump just said, no. We tried to do that in Iraq, right? We wiped out everybody and you ended up with complete chaos. You have to have some kind of continuity of the institutions that are, you know, again, it gets back to what I said in terms of when many people in the world, many people in this country compromise with institutions of evil because you think you have no choice. You know, how many people in the United States basically put their heads down over the decades saying there's nothing I can do. You know, we keep going from a bad Democrat to a bad Republican to a bad Democrat to a bad Republican. I'm just going to figure out how to live in that world as best I possibly can. Because you didn't have the sense that there would ever be a force powerful enough to challenge that uniparty and that establishment. Well, guess what? If you think that's true in the United States, how about the world, where pretty much any leader in the post-war period who challenged this British imperial elite got assassinated or couped? I was talking about India the other day with on a different podcast. Indira Gandhi, you know, somebody who represented and somebody who our own mentor had personal relations with, was fighting for the economic independence and the development of nuclear power for India, assassinated. And if I remember correctly, her son was subsequently assassinated, almost a kind of Kennedy familial assassination. Mexico, in the 1980s, when the Mexican president Lopez Portillo wanted to use Mexico's oil wealth to develop nuclear power. Again, this is what always happens because the British love their fossil fuels so that they can constantly control them. Of course, once they think they control all their fossil fuels, they wanted to get rid of them and have windmills and solar panels. How'd that work out for them in Europe? But you know, Lopez Portillo was completely isolated. Other leaders around the world have been assassinated, industrialists and others, because they stick their head above the foxhole and dare to actually put forward economic development policies. So honestly, most leaders around the world until Donald Trump came along just put their heads down and said, I'm going to live in this world. I don't care how bad it is. I'm going to stay alive and maybe do the best I can, or maybe I'll just cash in. I'm living in this world. And then Trump comes along and says, no, I'm going to create a world where better forces can arise within countries. But as Barbara said, it has to be organic. And to see those better forces beginning to develop, whether it's in Venezuela, whether it's in Iran, whether it's in Israel, whether it's in any country, a world in which you're allowed to actually act on the basis of what is best for your people, as opposed to following the playbook that the people who otherwise are going to kill you or coup you or starve you tell you you're going to carry out. That's the principle of leadership in the world. That's where what Donald Trump is doing is something none of us have seen in our lifetimes. And you have to start to evaluate from that standpoint. I just want to make one other comment. I wish people would stop trying to do diplomacy through social media. I mean, it's just, you know, it's sophomoric. It's ridiculous. Most people are not thinking from the standpoint of this strategy and this history. And, even if you are, even if Barbara and I are from that standpoint, we're not on the inside in terms of the considerations that the president and his team are making. So, it's armchair quarterbacking at its worst.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Barbara. And thank you, Amy, for joining us this week. Love having you here every week. Okay, I'm going to take now. Let me just tease you guys a little bit. I know one of the biggest questions that came up in our questions that we got from our email newsletter subscribers, but also I saw a bunch of people bringing it up in the chat, is data centers. So we are going to be talking about data centers in just a moment, but just to close this loop here, because we've done this entire show basically on Iran, Israel, the potential for peace in the Middle East. Literally, we've done an hour on this topic. So let me close the loop here and just take this very simple question on what's going on in Gaza. And Paula asks, very simple question. And I don't know the situation on the ground. Maybe Susan or Barbara have some thoughts on it, but I thought this would close the story loop really well here. What is happening with Gaza? This is something that so many people in our audience say and ask us all the time. So what's going on?
Well, what's happening is the reconstruction is pretty much stalled. I think in part until we resolve the current state of conflict in terms of Iran and therefore Israel and therefore the Abraham Accords. The structures that were put in place to rebuild are not rebuilding very quickly. But I think, again, that's a function of it being still embedded in this strategic entanglement, which the president is trying to untangle. That being said, the Board of Peace stands ready to begin to rebuild on a massive scale. But I think that we're going to have to see the resolution of this larger conflict before that moves forward.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add.
Okay, and it's really funny. Somebody in the chat just reminded me I did want to take this, which is on a very similar topic, which is actually on what's going on in Lebanon. About a month ago, I saw a non-traditional news story on Israeli actions against Lebanese people. History made it seem that Israel was committing genocide against the residents. Residents of Limited. This includes killing families, women, children. Are there active Israeli factions involved in this war that are still intent on developing a greater Israel by conquering and engulfing countries that surround Israel as we now know her? Thank you, William, for your question.
This is, again, a deep history in terms of Lebanon was, one of the really sovereign states in the Middle East. It suffers from a history of French colonialism, which is still a very active force there. But the primary thing that's going on is Hezbollah. And Hezbollah has been attacking Israel. It's committed to destroying Israel. And particularly an entire area of Israel can't be occupied at this point by the population. They've been completely moved out because of the incoming rockets and everything else coming from Hezbollah. So the United States has intervened. There are peace talks going on right now, literally today, I believe, in Washington, D.C., at the State Department, between all of the various parties in the Lebanese conflict, trying to settle that war, with the Secretary of State very much trying to achieve a peace there. And we'll just have to see how that all pans out. But it's part of the same package. Hezbollah is totally funded by Iran and has been. And that is the real conflict going on right now in the entire Middle East.
Yeah, but to answer the other part of that, yes, there are innocent women and children and families and villages being destroyed by Israeli attacks. Yes, there is a greater Israel faction. which wants to carve out large parts of the Mideast. But again, it all comes back to what we've already established. This is the British strategy of red ants and black ants, and it's not going to be solved inside that jar.
Thank you, ladies. Okay, a little bit of a change in pace. We got another significant super chat, but it's on a topic that I didn't have any questions queued up about, but it's certainly a topic that comes up all the time in our newsletter questions and in the chat. So I'd like to thank you, Jim, for the super chat. I'm sorry about your loss, but this is a question that does come up a lot, and I think this is super important for us to discuss. Actively participate in bioweapon labs and COVID-19 vaccine manufacture to achieve this. I lost my 30-year-old son to this vaccine. I'm sorry to hear about that, Jim. Again, sorry for your loss. Barbara and Susan, any thoughts on the bioweapon lab story and the COVID-19 vaccine story Barbara, earlier you were discussing this and regarding a question with Tom Luongo?
Well, basically what's going on is the administration is moving, I think, very forcefully on this. They've indicted Anthony Fauci's key assistant, and basically they've indicted him on very, very strong obstruction of justice charges. They are, basically in a major investigation showing, that the actual vaccine side effects and other things were deliberately blocked. And they're working on that investigation to actually indict people. With respect to the whole nature of these bioweapons and all this other stuff, that's an area that I really think is being looked at very, very hard by Tulsi Gabbard and by lots of other people in terms of what in the hell was going on here. Why did we have bioweapons labs in Ukraine? What was that all about? And, the Eco Health Alliance, I mean, this indictment is a big deal. And I can't emphasize it enough to people because the charges that I read the indictment, it's very strong. If a plea deal is made, most certainly this guy is going to basically implicate the Eco Health Alliance, which was running all of the experiments at the lab in China. And it's going to shift the entire nature of what people actually think. This was not supposed to be happening. In other words, Barack Obama, for the one good thing he did, is he banned this type of research. So it was completely outside the bounds of what was then legally going on. Fauci went around it. There's lots of actual applications for the types of technologies which were actually used in creating the COVID-19 vaccines, primarily in cancer treatment. It's part of the whole regime around immunotherapy. The problem is that this was a scientific experiment with absolutely no guardrails to it. All right. If I'm a cancer patient and I go for immunotherapy, they're going to tell me essentially the following. This is either a way that you're going to get cured totally, or you're going to die from the treatment. That's disclosed to you when you go into immunotherapy because they don't know how to tune it to the human immune system yet. They're working on it, but in that instance, they tell you up front, this is an experimental treatment. Some people who have these deadly blood cancers actually come out of this completely cancer-free. Other people die from it because we don't know how to tune the immune system. They'll tell you that. This, on the other hand, is almost the same thing being massively inoculated into an entire population. And the problem was that the risks were not made clear to people at all, and it was mandated. That was crazy. That was insane. And, I think you're also going to find out it was not just, some kind of mistake. It was literally a very evil type of intention which was behind it. primarily involved, I'm going to tell you up front, in making a lot of money. So that's the deal. And that's as much as we know at this point. I think we're going to be learning a lot more. I'm very, very sorry for your loss.
Yeah, that was a forced medical treatment that they pushed on the population, and they used all levels of coercion to do it, including outrightly lying about it. Yeah, that's really like Nazi medicine at its finest. Thank you, Jim, for sending in your question. Sorry for your loss. We have free newsletter. Make sure you're subscribed. Love to see you here. Thank you. Okay, now we're going to move to the data center question, because I know just by seeing people talk about it in the chat before I started, I knew this was a hot topic. So let me pull them up here. I'm going to take 5 of them at a time, but they kind of reflect the same thing. Okay, so first one here is from Jackie. In Southwest Michigan, where we live in the summer, our Smart Lake community is up in arms against Trump's data centers taking over good farmland. All of them have TDS, but I'm not sure how to respond. They certainly don't want one taking over the fields nearby, and do worry about the underground springs feeding our lake. Of course, none of these people said a word. Food farmland was sold for solar field, which causes the field to be unusable for crops for 50 years. And it's good that you bring up that little ironic point at the end there. All these people are complaining about data centers, but they weren't anywhere to be found when they were doing solar fields. So thank you, Jackie, for your question and the insight. Victoria says, in your opinion, is it a foregone conclusion that data centers are coming to rural America no matter what? And can you speak to whether or not you feel that the administration is going to take any measure to make sure that fragile water-stressed communities are not left with destruction from them? I ask because I'm curious what you're hearing and seeing. Are you seeing that there is a lot of negative propaganda versus real legitimate concern? In my community in eastern New Mexico, there is a definite concern, and I and many others have, about productive farms and ranch land being used for them and the water needed, which would further stress our current water situation, affect reproductive agriculture, and depress our economy once the center potentially folds. Appreciate your thoughts. Thank you, Victoria. Kerry, what are all the data centers that's popping up everywhere? What are the data centers really used for that are popping up everywhere? Thank you, Kerry, for your question. Mary says, is anyone in control of the data centers going up? Using precious water supplies, the chemtrail poisons we breathe? Does Trump even know? Thank you, Mary. And finally, Nancy, with all the focus on data centers across the US in mostly rural areas, what is their purpose and will they happen? With all the resources needed to run them and the backhand deals to get the land and the water, is it really for the good of all? Thank you for all you do, Nancy. And thank you, Nancy, for sending in this question.
Well, I'll start. Kevin O'Leary, who many people probably know from television, has just been coming out and saying he's trying to build a data center. And he, basically set off an investigation to find out where all of the fear-mongering around his data center was coming from. And much to no one's surprise, he discovered that it was a Chinese intelligence operation. Now, why would that be? Because we're in a race, whoever actually masters this technology, and it's going to be used for all sorts of things. It is really a very complex area for analysis in terms of moving forward with our economy, what it does and does not do. But I think it's pretty safe to say that it will massively increase productivity. And whatever nation actually masters it is going to actually lead the next century. So that's the geostrategic economic reality of what's going on. Now, are all of these things really being cool in terms of essentially making sure that they don't eat up everything? Trump has made a very decent point. I don't want them on the electrical grid. They're going to build them and they're going to create their own electrical sources, and we're going to monitor the thing because the grid can't handle, literally, in its present state. We're modernizing it, but it can't handle what is about to happen in terms of the massive amount of power we actually need to run these things. Obviously, in an area, the farmland question, the use of land questions, everything else, what's going on is an effort to turn all of this over to localities as part of a overall campaign against AI, in my view, to basically say to you, we're going to make these things environmentally secure, but it'll be like every project that goes on in California. It's not going to get done. All right, we're going to put so many impediments in the place of these things being built that it doesn't get done because people really don't want to handle the challenge of figuring out what happens in an economy where we give up a lot of jobs that are just make-work jobs, to be blunt. And AI is now doing that. Okay, what happens?
Barbara, let me just say, I totally agree with your hypothesis. It's not just that I could pull up a video, robotics, so it's going to be AI plus this robotics thing that's literally about to crash on everyone's reality. It's almost here, really.
So, now we're, I mean, if you step into a Tesla, which, I did the other day, you feel like you're in a different century. Okay. And that's a good feeling. It's what we Americans are all about. We're about always smashing through the next frontier of science and technology and figuring out essentially how do we handle any displacement which occurs through that. Generally, what happens in history, folks, is that when new technologies come in, there's always a clamor that says it's going to ruin everything. All right. Nobody's going to be able to work. It'll all be crazy. The machines are going to run things. This picture is painted of this completely dystopian reality. I'm not saying that Silicon Valley has done the best job here in actually coming out and reassuring people what this is all about. And I think they need to do a better job at it. But I really am quite suspicious of all of the things which are going on, since the primary other power in the world that wants to supersede us in this area is China. And as I said before, whoever masters this technology and associated technologies of the future, including nuclear power and fusion power, is going to lead the world. That's reality. So that's how I'll start. I'm sure Susan has a much better feel for what's going on locally than I do. I live in the data center universe of the world. Every inch of Loudoun County is covered with data centers at this point. And I can tell you, we still have electricity and we still have water. So somehow that's working out.
But I will add that, if especially you're in a particularly green state, like I happen to be in, and I don't mean that we've got a lot of forests, which we do here in Michigan, but run by lunatic left-wing Democrats who want to suppress modern energy development and so on, you're going to have a problem, because not all of these data centers, there's a cutoff in terms of the size of a data center that has to provide its own energy and so on. So you get below a certain size, they can have an impact in an area where you have, in a state where you don't have enough energy, where your energy is already extremely expensive because the local energy company under the governor and her regime went woke and green and haven't built any nuclear power. So the one aspect of the data centers that has to be addressed is adequate energy supply. Clearly, this administration is doing that on a national basis, but that doesn't mean it's seeped down into every state. So there are dislocations. There's other questions too. Why not just build them on brownfields? Why not build them on existing, abandoned industrial sites as opposed to grabbing up farmland? I mean, there are legitimate questions, but we're going to have to, which is always the case with something new, which means you have to have sane national leadership. You have to have sane state leadership. And you actually have to have an educated citizenry, which understands what the real necessity for this is, and then can look at what legitimate, real local concerns are and work through that process. But from the standpoint of the fact that this is the technology of the future, and what Barbara just said, I didn't know, but I'm going to pull on that string a little bit more in terms of, oh gosh, because if people noticed, I mean, some of those questions were from people who are in areas where this is happening, but they're saying talking in terms of the concern and the opposition almost similarly worded, which does suggest to me that there is an orchestrated campaign, which really, as the first question, Jackie said, gosh, nobody cared when the solar panels took over the farmlands, right? Now everybody's concerned about data centers. So, it's not it's not a binary choice from the standpoint of, oh, we need them, oh, we can't possibly have them. It's, here's the world that you live in. This is the new technology. China, and the race is between the United States and China at this point. We cannot cede the field to it. And that's why I think the administration is trying to come up with national policies so that you can deal with this in a rational way, which is not detrimental to local communities.
Thank you very much, Barbara and Susan. I just want to spend a few seconds here because I think the issue of robotics is literally about to hit and people are freaking out. So I just want to play here just a few seconds of a company's demo called Boston Dynamics. They are arguably the absolute world leaders in robotics technology. And I want to give everyone a sense of where it is right now. All right. And just one more here. I'm going to pick one of these. They supposedly, I haven't even seen these one here. Let's just pick football school. Damn. Dude, that's a shot. So, guys.
Except that's not football, that's soccer.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Just seeing it on screen. Also, it's awesome that we were. Whoops, sorry. Let me turn this off. It's just I had to mind the FIFA World Cup, which is pretty amazing. That's going to be happening on the 250th anniversary of the United States. So I wanted to play that, guys. You have to remember, Elon Musk is in this game too. The Optimus robots, I think they're reconfiguring some of their factories to be mass producing these things. So this is going to be taking a lot of the make work jobs coming very soon. Okay, any final thoughts on this, Barbara, Susan, before we move on here?
No, we gotta actually think it through. We gotta we have a shortage of labor. All right, we've taken all of the, I'll be blunt, slave labor out of the country for the most part by shutting down the border, and now we have a real shortage of labor. that can partially be solved by this type of robotics. But I think it's really critical what the administration is also doing in shifting education away from crazy college degrees in things like feminism, and actually, creating the basis of trades. They just put out a huge report saying that, right now, this generation coming up is shifting into the trades. And that's good. That's essentially the adjustment which we need to make in the workforce. And the trades will be very much you out there eventually controlling your own robots to produce things, to do anything that you want them to do. But it's going to increase productivity enormously. And it's not going to be a situation where you just go out and sit on a couch somewhere and watch endless amounts of video games or TV. The whole idea here is to make work the work of creativity and the mind, which is what, God actually created us to do. So the dignity of work, the Pope shouldn't worry about that, because the dignity of work is going to be put on a much higher level. He just did a whole encyclical on this, which is a topic of discussion. I think it's a very useful jumping off point to begin to think through the implications of this revolution we're already going through.
Yeah, and I'll also mention, the skilled trades, and especially machine tooling, is one of the places where you do see the intersection of AI and the skilled trades, because a skilled tradesman who actually knows how to use AI, but the skilled tradesman is still, the critical question is, how do you get a new idea out of somebody's mind and put it into a machine tool so that it can create a new machine? New ideas. That's where AI will never be able to do it. The point of the new idea, and then communicating that new idea to another human mind, which then figures out, how do I make a machine tool to do this, is something which is absolutely unique to the human being. But at that point, you can then, once you've taken that creative germ and you've figured it out, and then you've got to create an extremely complex machine tool to do this new kind of thing that you've figured out. That can increase your productivity enormously. I was at a recent political event here where one of the candidates said, a skilled machinist who knows how to use AI, they're still a machinist, they just know how to use AI, can pull down over $200,000 a year. And believe me, they did not go to a 4-year liberal arts college and come out with $250,000 in debt. They probably came right out of a trade school with no debt and went to work.
Somebody, I want to clarify something, because somebody actually correctly pointed out that in terms of public ownership of Boston Dynamics, it is primarily owned by SoftBank, which is a Japanese company, and they have other international investors, but that company is under the craziest export controls. So companies can't just own Boston Dynamics and export the tech. The whole issue of Boston Dynamics, people don't talk about, but that company is like heavily export controlled, and all of their robotics tech is developed in-house in the United States. And as far as I know, their products that they produce have only come out of Boston Dynamics. I don't think anyone's made technology that was based on their tech in a different product. I don't think that's happened yet. So yes, maybe Boston Dynamics technically is owned by this international consortium, right? Owned by the Japanese, owned by other Asian countries, but the tech is definitely export controlled. So it's you go follow those guys, you should be rooting for them, because if anyone's going to beat the Chinese in robotics, it's probably going to be them at the moment, in terms of general purpose robotics. Okay, so so first off, thank you everyone for tuning in. Please hit the like button if you haven't yet already on x.com. Please give us a share if you've been enjoying this. And just to remind everyone, we do have a free newsletter. The link's in the description. Okay, let's go to what's going on in the Senate. and the Save America Act, because the news cycle is just constantly pummeling your brain, and there's actually really important stuff that happens like weeks ago that like get lost in the news cycle. So let's go back to this issue here. So first, thank you, Jack. Maybe off topic, but what can be done with Thune and his blatant disregard for what the American people want? Thank you for your insight on these topics, and I wish you would run a daily news update. Okay. And then thank you, Jack. And then second one is, Robert, what is the real reason John Thune refuses to pass the Save America Act?
Well, you just saw what we can do about Thune with the election results in Texas. And believe me, that sent a bolt of lightning through the United States Senate. Look, these guys are completely out of touch with America who are in the Senate and have been. John Thune is a protege of Mitch McConnell. He is in what everybody lovingly refers to as the Rhino grouping within the Senate, which, while pledging adherence to Donald Trump, really thinks that if you run on Trump's program, you're going to lose because why? Well, because of the polling on Trump and all of the things we say about him, etc. That just got completely disproven by the election results. So what can be done? You can turn out for the midterms, and you can basically cast a resounding vote for Republicans, hold your nose on the rhinos, because what that means is that everybody is predicting at this point that the Senate and the House are going to be taken by the Democrats. That's the establishment view, and that's what's shaping all of this legislation at this point. If you turn out in the midterms and you vote for those people the president has endorsed, and you vote for them overwhelmingly, John Thune isn't stupid. Washington will get the message. We have been wrong. We're screwed. Well, I'm not up for election at this point, but the Senate and everything in it is going to lose its shirt if we don't start acting on behalf of the American people. And I think that's what the Texas results, that's what the Kentucky results, that's what every result is showing. We hate you guys. Don't even pretend that we like you. That's what the American people are saying to the United States Senate. You haven't done a damn thing, really, except do what the president wanted by passing the big, beautiful bill. But other than that, you're ridiculous. You think you're out there as the big independent branch subverting everything the president is doing, not just the Save America Act, his appointments, everything else. And you can send a huge message by voting for the Trump-endorsed candidates overwhelmingly in the midterms. You already sent a huge message from Texas, which, believe me, is going to start changing dynamics. That's the same thing we saw in November of 2024. How do you think the big, beautiful bill got passed? It didn't get passed because the rhinos wanted it. It got passed because they said, holy cow, we're going to lose the midterms totally. We won't have any power. We'll be in the opposition in Washington. And we want to, and we'll do what the president says at this point, because that's what the people clearly expressed by that mandate. Now, the media drive, the propaganda, all that other stuff has been set up to take its toll. And the midterms are the critical inflection point for us. Fixing the possibility of voter fraud, we did it already once in November, which we have to keep reminding people. And we did it by expanding the Trump coalition widely and creating the basis to actually create a mandate. That's the job ahead of us for the midterms. So I think that's the story there. Susan may have other things to add.
Yeah, Adam, I want to share my screen. Because I did a graph. No.
Oops.
There we go. Because before you had this overwhelming vote for Paxton defeating Cornyn yesterday, which I think has sent, as Barbara just said, electroshock through the rhinos in the Senate. The other big one was Thomas Massie getting defeated in the primary. And of course, what was all the Psy-war propaganda around that? The Psy-war propaganda around that was, oh, Israel came in and bought this election and defeated Thomas Massie. So I thought that was a little absurd, given the composition of the people in his district. So I created this. And if you look at this, this is the votes. Massie was primaried in the last 4 elections. But if you look at this, Massie's the blue, and his opponent is, they were obviously different opponents, is the red. But look at what was happening. 2020, 2022, 2024. This is before, quote, huge amounts of AIPAC money and Miriam Adelson and all the rest of this was pumped in there. He was losing support. His vote totals were going down. He didn't have a serious challenger in them, but he was losing support and his vote totals were going down because people saw him as obstructing Donald Trump. His vote totals were okay in 2020 because he kept voting against Obama. He kept voting against the Biden policies, Mr. No. Well, that's fine. What's that old saying? A stop clock is right half the time. When you're voting against crazy Democrats, cool. But what happens when you get somebody who's doing something, wants to use your government productively, which is what the president of the United States is doing, and you keep voting against it because of your libertarian ideology, which says all government is bad, and the magic of the free markets, which just means British money is good, right? So his vote totals were going down consistently. And then you get this race where he had a ton of money. His opponent had 17 million. He had 13 million. So he boosted his a little bit. But look at this. These are all new voters who came to the polls to vote for Donald Trump. That's what that vote was. Believe me, they weren't going in and voting saying, I support Bibi Netanyahu. They were voting for the candidate that Donald Trump said, I want him because he will be loyal to me. So, and I think that question of increasing the voter turnout, that's extremely important because that is how we do defeat the whatever amount of vote fraud capability is still going to be in place. If by some continuing political pressure with maybe a little bit of miracle, we get the SAVE Act through. We'll have to see. As Barbara said, it's a little different climate in the Senate as of Wednesday after Cornyn's massive defeat, despite the fact that he had the entire Senate establishment behind him. There might be a little bit of a different climate. This may be the time to go back to the drawing board and up the ante in terms of the Senate. But my attitude is always, whatever the state of play is, whether we make any breakthroughs on the election integrity front or not, we still have to win. And we have to win by increasing the voter turnout. And that means going to the blue collar workers, going to the independents, and bringing this new reality to them. Adam, I'm going to go to the boot camp for our slideshow. Our half-page flyer for a minute.
Susan, and you know what? Before you do, let me pull up a super chat right now because something came in and I want to answer this question. So first off, thank you very much, Ray Butler, for your very generous super chat. He says, "I love what you are doing for us all. I'm in the mechanic field of the trades for 50 years. Want to help you guys spread the word. Thanks again." So yeah, this is a section I was about to. So Susan's taking the words. There's going to be 2 things. It's going to be this flyer plus our midterm boot camp. So I hope this answers your question right here.
But also, while I'm doing this, Adam, can you pull up that other clip from the cabinet meeting, which was on America being, it was the middle 2.
Okay, hold on a moment.
I'll get to that in a minute. Because I think it's going to bolster this point. Ray, thank you very much. And I saw a lot of other people in the chat talking about how their kid just went to a trade school and came out after 17 weeks with a license and immediately got a job and so on. This is the new future. And that is what we have to communicate in the midterms. making the United States a productive manufacturing superpower, again, which is actually progressing in the real world. So the intervention of our Political Action Committee arm, Promethean PAC, into the midterms is this. And before I describe this, we have Promethean Action, which is our policy arm, which hosts these shows. We have our Political Action Committee, of which Barbara Boyd is the treasurer, which is explicitly designed to intervene into the federal election process here in the United States. So Promethean PAC has designed this half-page flyer. This is the first side of it, where we make clear to people that the president is indeed carrying out a manufacturing revolution. Oh, wait a minute, there's the second side. And here's the second side. This is about 5 months old. And in fact, I'm in the middle of designing a new flyer right now because while this one will continue to circulate, we want to update what this administration has already done. But this was a snapshot from about 4 months ago of some of the breakthroughs that are already taking place in terms of reviving our manufacturing in the United States, our energy independence, new facilities for minerals processing and other things that we haven't seen new facilities in 50 or 70 years. This is a multi-generational change in the United States, and this is what we have to bring in to the midterm elections. Now, we also conduct what we call the midterm boot camp. I'm not sure where things are in my slideshow, so I'm just going to stay where I was. We conduct a midterm boot camp. There we go. Adam's pulling that up. And every other Monday, the next one is June 1st. Adam is showing you where you can sign up for the midterm boot camps. These are national Zoom discussions with activists all over the country. The last one we had, and these are really great because we're interacting with people who are organizing, who are trying to take Donald Trump's ideas into the midterm process. And somebody came up with a really great turn of phrase in our last boot camp. They said, I think we should talk about the blue state blues. And this is going to be on our next half-page flyer. Because while Trump is unleashing this, and you see it in North Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, Texas, Arizona, the blue states are sitting there withering. I was mentioning Michigan earlier. We have no energy. We have no investment. We have no nothing because we have lunatics. Those are the blue state blues where the manufacturing boom is being passed by. So we're going to integrate that into the next half-page flyer that we actually do. But what we have to do is communicate to people there is a revolution going on. There is a change in the national economic identity of this country, of being a nation of consumers and spectators and losers to a nation of producers and builders and makers. And this is something that the head of the Small Business Administration addressed yesterday in the cabinet meeting. Adam, can you pull that up? I thought it was pretty much.
Which one, the first one or the second one?
The second one.
Okay.
Well, but 2A and 2B. There's two together.
All right. I'll have to play them individually. Here's the first one.
Mr. President, you have made us a nation of builders again. You're leading us to the greatest economy that the world has ever known. And I see that every week as I travel this country, main streets across dozens of states, from Alaska to Maine. I've been in many of those states 2 or 3 times. I hear it everywhere I go. Please thank the president for putting us back on track. They thank you. They love you. They want more of what we're doing: tax cuts, deregulation, fair trade, energy dominance. Small businesses are spring-loaded, and we see that in the jobs numbers. In the last 2 months alone, we've created over 300,000 private sector jobs in this country. Most jobs are created by small businesses, 2 out of 3. And small businesses, as you know, make up 99% of all businesses in this country and account for half of our GDP. So when that part of the economy is finally working again, but then just back to small businesses, we have record business formation in this country. That's another story that the media won't tell you. Over 500,000 businesses on average a month this year. So it's not just record people working, strong job creation, business formation at all-time records in this country, but we have manufacturing expansion, 4 consecutive months that means that's a leading indicator, meaning that we have expansion coming. Another story the media won't tell you, 98% of all manufacturers are small businesses. 75% of our defense industrial base is small business. They're our main exporters. And so America first, fair trade, deregulation, tax cuts, and energy dominance is helping workers on Main Street.
I mean, I don't know if you caught that. She said 500,000 new business startups per month this year, per month, right? And as she pointed out, a lot of this is manufacturing. You know, a huge percentage of our manufacturing base is the small businesses, starting with the machine tool shops. So this is what's happening, and this is the future, and it's going to accelerate as the new facilities come online. Earlier, Trump talked about the new construction jobs of constructing manufacturing facilities. Well, a lot of them aren't online yet, so the building trades guys are working, but you know, maybe the UAW or the steel workers or whatever, they don't have the jobs yet because they haven't turned the switch on the factory, but it's coming. It's coming. And this is what we have to communicate to people for the midterm elections. And that's how you're going to get a better class of Senate and a better class of Congress.
Did you want me to play the second clip here?
No, that was it. They ended up merging together. That was fine.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to comment on what you were saying about the small shops. So there is a bunch of small shops. So there's been kind of a manufacturing explosion on the amount of YouTube small shop manufacturing channels where people are showing you the insides of their manufacturing operations. There's also a massive explosion in additive manufacturing. Right, traditional machining is you start with something big and then you subtract material from the part. Right, that's traditional machining, CNC style lathe operations. But with additive manufacturing now, they can print metals. That's an actual thing, and you can buy, right, as an individual, if you have the motivation and the skill and understanding, you can now buy these semi-industrial machines and make parts for various other operations. So this is literally happening on YouTube. I'm already seeing some of these channels in my feed. Okay. Wow. I totally forgot. I forgot my train of thought. Okay. Luckily, I took notes here. So let me pull up my Q&A questions here. All right, so the next question here, yes, is going to be on the Fed. And I wanted to take a question that came in very early in the discussion, and I'm going to group it in with other questions on the Bretton Woods and the Fed. So thank you, Lee, for waiting. If you're still watching with us, I did want to take this question. I just knew it was going to come later in the show. So Lee Herring says, hey, guys, thank you for keeping me sane. Any word on the Fed being dismantled, maybe before the 4th? So I don't know about before the 4th, but let me pull up these other questions that I want to take along with it here. Okay, that'd be number 12. Okay, so these next 4 questions. Whoops. There we go. So Serena asks, can you explain to us what the Bretton Woods is? I think a lot of people had that question. Thank you, Serena. And then Greg says, why did Nixon take us off the U.S. gold standard? So basically asking, why did Nixon take us off the Bretton Woods agreement? So the gold standard agreements. Okay. Greg also says, do you think President Trump will put the dollar back on the gold standard? And tell us more about the dollar being pegged to gold, please. And I think this question here about the connection to a gold standard, right? Because we're not talking about a straight, like, I think we're talking about, a gold reserve, misspoke. We're talking about a gold reserve system and the potentiality of what a new Fed might look like. Barbara and Susan, your thoughts?
Well, it's very clear that Kevin Warsh's mission is to scale back the Fed. In other words, it's gotten huge in terms of what it's trying to do. You can make the argument that it's actually been running the economy. which was even as a British invention, which we never had it before, 1913. It wasn't supposed to just run the entire economy. And so what you've got right now is a determined effort to scale it back, to bring it back to, probably the issue of what happens with interest rates. And I think the Trump administration is generally opposed to the notion that it has any, Congress has given it the authority for full employment under Humphrey Hawkins. But I don't think the Trump administration necessarily agrees with that. The Trump administration is taking care of the employment side of the equation. What's far more interesting is what's happening with subordinating the Fed to the Treasury Department, which is really what a lot of people have called for years, and putting the responsibility for this right back into the executive in a certain way, to run the equivalent of what was Hamilton's national bank. His idea was, let's have a national bank, or areas of capital investment. A sovereign wealth fund is another form of the same idea, where it has no other purpose than to invest in the fundamental side of the physical economy. People have been talking about water in their area, for example. We have a huge deficit in water infrastructure in this country. If you actually have a national infrastructure type of purpose in the government, which is different than all the craziness around the Green New Deal and all this other crap, we can solve the water problem. There's no reason for it to exist. So what's happening is gradual, all right? They're not going to do it right away, because you're in a very tense situation where you have all sorts of powers trying to crash the economy, frankly, from the standpoint of the City of London, making Trump fail. And what is being done here is a path through to the future, but you can see the path clearly. And it's big politics. As I said in my brief, why is Trump reaching out to China? Why is he reaching out to Russia? Why was Rubio spending 4 days in India during a war? Well, it's because if you read the national security strategy, you see it. Trump is revising the entire world, and the Fed is going to become an instrument for that revision. Primarily, it's going to be curbed to start with. But the second thing that's going to happen is that, what Trump is doing is he's not using any of the traditional ways that people think about this. Wall Street banks, what is he doing with them? Is he trying to kill them? No. He's trying to say, here's how you can make money. Okay, come with the government, invest in America, actually do things on Main Street, make loans to Main Street. That's the message which is being given to Wall Street. It's very similar to the type of mobilization which actually occurred during World War II, where private industry and everything else was brought into one central mission. And the central mission of the Trump administration: develop the United States and create a trading relationship with the rest of the world in which we actually profit and they actually profit. Now, what was Bretton Woods? Simply, it was the monetary system which was actually developed after World War II and after a big fight between Franklin Roosevelt and the British. Roosevelt told Churchill, we're not going to get in another British war on behalf of the British Empire. What we're going to do is we're going to break the colonial system, and we're going to use American methods to actually help all of these other nations develop, because that's good for us. We'll make money off of actually helping the world develop through American methods. So what Bretton Woods was a meeting in which the British and the United States fought it out. The British wanted a what we would call today a centralized digital currency, what everybody is talking about and is afraid of. That was John Maynard Keynes, and he said, we want a bancor, which would be controlled by globalist financial institutions. The United States said instead, no, we're going to have the dollar as the reserve currency, and we're going to peg the dollar to gold as a reserve standard, which created what? The most important part of this is not the monetary part. It created a stable relationship for long-term, low-interest loans to actually promote production. That was what was actually accomplished at the Great Bretton Woods fight. Why did Nixon cave? Well, because the City of London created a whole, that's a very complex question. The City of London created a whole mess around the gold reserve standard, using all of their economic might to do so. And, he was influenced by some very nasty British agents within the United States government to actually kill Bretton Woods. But that's a very complicated story, and I don't really I wouldn't do it service by actually just, giving you my off-the-top observation about that. There were lots of causes to it. But the point was that their intention in getting the United States out of the Bretton Woods thing and getting it linked to, pure currency speculation in the City of London was to create exactly the dark age, which we've all just lived through. So, that's kind of a sketch. Again, you could write a whole book about this, but, it's kind of a sketch as to the fundamental dynamics.
Susan, any thoughts on this one?
I just want to mention Barbara did address this in her Wednesday show. And in her Wednesday show, she also referenced a more extensive class by Will Wirtz, which is on the Promethean Action website from beginning of May.
May 2nd?
May 2nd. So for people who want to dive a little more deeply into this, go to the Promethean Action website, go to the classes, and watch that.
Yeah, let me actually, that's a good point. Let me go ahead and pull this up for people right here, so they can just get a sense of where Will's class is on the site.
Yeah, good idea.
So this is the Promethean Action website here, and if you just do a search for
well, actually, the drop down for shows is the easiest way to find it, I find. But oh yeah, I guess you can do it that way.
Yeah, if you just type Bretton Woods, it's a Saturday class. So if you just type why we need a new. So if you just type in why we need a new Bretton Woods, it should come up right here on the Promethean Action website, and it's this thing. This is on our other channel. So if you go and look for it on the Promethean Updates channel, you're not going to find it there. It's on our second channel called Promethean In Depth. But I just showed everyone how to get to it from the Promethean.
And Adam, scroll back up to the toolbar at the top. Let me just notice where it says shows there. This is where you can find all of our shows, the updates Barbara and I do, our science shows, our classes. Our friend Mike Steger does Promethean overviews. So we do a lot of stuff. And, we know that YouTube isn't exactly reliable in terms of notifying you. So if you want to follow all of our video output, hang out under that drop-down.
Thank you, Lee, for sending in the questions. Thank you to all of our newsletter supporters for joining us. Again, I encourage everyone, please, the link to get our free newsletters in the description. It'll allow us to stay in contact with what we do on a weekly basis outside of YouTube's control. Okay, and I want to take another set of questions here on the American system, and also a similar thing, but I'm going to start here again. So thank you, Paul Cahill, for the question here. How about packaging the American system so Iran and the rest of the world can adopt it? Australians suffer from the idiots in charge who are now taxing us without taking it to an election. Commies in charge. They certainly are. They have the terrible mindset. And I want to pull this in with some more questions here about the American system. So first question is, what is Alexander Hamilton's American system? So thank you, Serena, for joining us again this week. Next question here is, some of the newer historians have couched Alexander Hamilton as a black hat as he pushed for a central banking system, which Jefferson and others decried. How would you reconcile his apparent globalist efforts, which eventually won out, with crediting him with the American system that Trump and the white hats are promoting? Thank you, Arctos. And the third question here is, I've always heard or read that Hamilton was the enemy of Jefferson and that he set up the fiat currency. Now I'm expected to believe he was a good guy. I don't know. Can you help me understand better? Thank you, Kriebel. And thank you, Paul, for your question about the American system and Australia. So Barbara and Susan, your thoughts on the American system, Hamilton, Jefferson, the fight for fiat currency versus a central bank, national bank.
Well, look, the people, people who have read about Hamilton and central banking and so on, ask yourself if in anything that you read, did anybody talk about the American system? And the answer is no, because one of the biggest things that was done in the last century or so is taking away from the American population the knowledge of the uniquely American economic discovery, which Alexander Hamilton made, and which was then carried forward by people like Lincoln and McKinley, and which is now being explicitly revived by this administration. People, for a quick short course, go look up Jameson Greer's speech at Davos. If you just put Jameson Greer and American system and Davos in your search engine, it's going to show up.
Is that from 2026?
Yeah. Our trade ambassador went to Davos and he schooled the globalists on the fact that we are bringing the American system of Alexander Hamilton back. Now, there's several elements to it, and national banking as opposed to central banking is one of them. But before you get into the mechanics of it, you have to start with the principle. The British system is based on money controlling everything. They control the money, therefore they control you. That's how their central banking system operates. And, they control the trade flows, they control the insurance, they control all of this. You don't have any economic independence. You're reliant on buying stuff from somebody who's controlled by the British. Like, hey, how about this as an example? Oil from the Persian Gulf, right? That's the British system. The American system of Alexander Hamilton is not based on money. It's based on producing things. It's based on man exerting greater dominion over nature so that we can produce more and better and support more people. And so the American system set up various kinds of institutions and policies that foster that question of actual production. Tariffs is one obvious side of it. That's what Jameson Greer talks about at length in that Davos speech. Support for internal improvements, the kind of big projects that private industry can't start, although they can participate in, like transcontinental railroads and space programs and Erie canals and so on. That's another part of it. And a national bank, which is not a central bank, is another part of it. A national bank says the US government is going to set up an institution to make sure that if the producers want to produce something, they're going to have credit, which you don't have under the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve says, well, we got to keep the balance sheets of JP Morgan Chase happy, and we don't care if no money goes. Why do you think Kelly Loeffler, the SBA administrator, just talked about 500,000 new business startups? I wonder where they're getting the credit from. Probably not the Federal Reserve, because we are setting up these kind of parallel lines of credit. Those are the three pillars of the American system that's been written out of our history. And yes, Jefferson opposed Hamilton completely. What good he did in writing the Declaration of Independence under Benjamin Franklin, we're not going to ignore that. But beyond that, his economics were pure British agrarian philosophy, and his outlook was purely British and was violently opposed not only to Hamilton, but was also opposed to, equally opposed to the Washington administration. You would be shocked at how violent his attacks on George Washington were. So, the man did not age well. Let me just put it that way. But of course, the British have rewritten our history to obscure all of this. But it's simple. Start with the American system versus the British system. Once you master the difference between those two things, and again, on the Promethean Action website, we have 2 pamphlets under our toolkit. One is called The American System 2.0, and the other is called Bye Bye Globalism, The American System is Back. Start there. Get the difference between the American system and the British system under your belt, and then you can start to relook at history from the standpoint of the fundamentals, not what somebody told you by pasting together 55 secondary and tertiary sources in order to come up with a story that is, going to keep you from understanding the power of our own economic system.
Barbara, any thoughts on the American system?
Well, I mean, your resources, the Promethean Action website, that's really what we're about. That's mostly what we spend all our time explaining to people. If you want to go deep, you can go deep by actually reading Alexander Hamilton's report on a national bank and his report on manufacturers, which allowed us to get out of complete bankruptcy after the American Revolution and actually build the strongest economy that ever existed on the face of the earth. You can read Henry Carey, who has a very succinct description. He was Abraham Lincoln's economist, and he actually was responsible through his measures for the Union winning the Civil War. But, he said basically there's 2 systems before the world. To doing it in shorthand, one is a money system, and the other actually focuses on the human mind and the actual use of the human mind to create whole economies and fill God's command to go forth and develop the earth in Genesis. So those are really shorthands for it, but it has a massive tradition in our history. McKinley, who Donald Trump cites all the time, was a complete exponent of it. It was exported to other countries. For example, in China, Sun Yat-sen was a complete advocate of the American system against the British system, and actually talked about the development of China in a very famous work in which he compared the 2 systems. This was known to people today, a lot of things. It was known to people what the American system was up through McKinley. And even, Franklin Roosevelt did a very different version of it after spending most of his recovery from polio reading Alexander Hamilton. It's been wiped out. The other major exponent who actually was responsible for getting it into Europe was a character by the name of Friedrich List, who was really, really important. And when our economy was taken down, you should know also that Karl Marx hated the American system, wrote whole diatribes about it. And when our system was destroyed after 1971, what the authors of that entire controlled disintegration of the U.S. economy, is what they called it, attacked, was the idea that the American system should ever come back into existence. So the exponents of this system have all been assassinated in our history. That may tell you something about why there's such a furor around Donald Trump. And the reason is it's a system which actually works and progresses for mankind. And everybody who's on the other side of that equation knows it and will do anything they can to destroy it. So that's how I put it out there.
Thank you, Barbara. And thank you, everyone. Great thank you to everyone in our audience, including Power Historian Thank you again. Thank you for the very generous super chat. As a historian, Promethean truly stands out as a refreshing presence. Thank you all for your incredible work. Parahistorian, please make sure you're subscribed to our free newsletter. The link is in the description. Check out our toolkit, our resources. You go to our website, there's a banner for a new pamphlet. Our toolkit has other pamphlets. It has some books from our own historians. So please make sure you get it. And then to everyone else, I know, guys, you send in so many questions. Jacob, thank you so much. MPF Pro, thank you for joining us again. Wellesley, thank you for your question. Thank you for the love. Humphrey Casa, thank you so much for joining us. KB Hugs, thank you so much. Paul Trainer, thank you for joining us every week. And everyone, if you're interested in this shirt, let me just give a quick shout out here for my shirt. So I have, it's only 3 designs right now. I have George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, and Benjamin Franklin. The link is called the America 250 collection. The link is also in the description. I threw up a link here on the YouTube product thing. Maybe it's showing up in your YouTube. I have 2 versions. I have both a premium tee, which is a little bit more, which is what I'm wearing, but I also have one, a super soft t-shirt that's a little bit cheaper. Check out my collection. You can, again, the link for it is in the description, and it should be coming up on the super chat. And so any final words, Barbara and Susan, before we close today's show?
Well, I think, you're going to basically see a lot of stuff happen over the course of the next week. We're in a transition period, folks. It gets very turbulent when you're doing something entirely new or reviving something that people have tried to destroy for over 250 years. We're at 250 years in the Republic, which is a remarkable achievement. And essentially what's going on now is a war over our future. And when we get through to the other side of all of the turbulence which is going on, because it's a war, you're going to see very clearly, just like getting up in space and looking down on the earth, you get a much clearer vision of everything that's going on. You will come through on the other side one way or the other. And we here are really dedicated to the proposition that Donald Trump's doing the right thing. Obviously, we might disagree with him on certain points of contention, but his directionality is something which we've never experienced in our lifetimes, which why I think you've got to constantly take the optimistic view of everything he's doing and say, how does this cohere with what Leibniz said, which is the only thing that's possible in God's universe, which is we live in the best of all possible worlds. So there's a lot of cynicism and pessimism out there. That's what they throw at you. It's designed to really crimp your mental powers. And if you start thinking in this direction, you'll find that you'll learn and know a whole lot more a lot faster. So that's how I'd end my comments for this show.
Yeah, and I just add that, when you're in a period of change, stop relying on labels, because, the whole point of change is that things are evolving into a different kind of system. We've been, people have been trapped in this British imperial system, and they've judged things. Their emotions are connected to it. They've slapped a bunch of labels, white hat, black hat, in this old system. And, what you have to get used to is that system is being destroyed and a new one is emerging, but it's emerging because the people who are leading it are operating from the standpoint of principles, not labels. And we've tried to get these principles across in terms of the difference between the British system and the American system and 2 images of man. Spend more time thinking through those principles and less time reacting to labels. And I think everyone will be a lot happier, and we're going to move a lot faster.
I just want to comment on something Barbara mentioned at the very end there. Pessimistic people never accomplish anything. It's really that simple, guys. If you're being led down a pessimistic path about your view about anything, that's fundamentally never going to actually change anything. And if anyone can show me a time when a pessimistic outlook actually accomplished anything good in the world, you can reach out to me on my x.com, because I don't think you're going to find that. So it behooves all of you to get a much bigger view of the world, of what human beings are capable of, and look at politics through that lens, not this pessimistic and cortisol-driven news cycle that we have. All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you live next Thursday, and our next political update will come on Saturday morning or afternoon. Thank you, everyone. See you next week.